Greetings and welcome on behalf of the Lumen Christi Institute. My name is Michael Le Chevalier and I serve as Acting Executive Director. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Lumen Christi was founded in 1997 by Catholic scholars at the University of Chicago. And our mission is to make the Catholic intellectual tradition a living dialogue partner at the University of Chicago and in our broader society through courses, lectures, summer seminars for graduate and undergraduate students, and virtual events like these. I just want to call your attention to one upcoming series that we're hosting this summer that is launching this Sunday, June 27th at 7:30 p.m. We are hosting a monthly series on wisdom from the heart of the Cistercian tradition. That is a collaboration with Our Lady of Dallas Cistercian Abbey. And this Sunday's event features Father Joseph Van House, who will be speaking on the Song of Songs in monastic interpretation. Today's event, completely different from this Sunday's program, is part of a new initiative at the Lumen Christi Institute, the Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network. I'll leave it to Judge Donnelly, who is spearheading the initiative, to describe it in greater detail, but I think it exemplifies what Lumen Christi does best: draw widely and broadly from the community of Catholic scholars and fellow travelers, draw deep from the wisdom of the church, interface with the best of modern scholarship, and apply it to one of America's most vexing issues today, our criminal justice system. Before I hand it over, I just want to extend gratitude to the co-sponsors from the Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network, members really of the network: Georgetown University Law Center, Notre Dame Law School, Boston College Law School, the University of St. Thomas School of Law, the Catholic Lawyers Guild of Chicago, the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, Colby House Jail Ministry, Seattle University Crime and Justice Research Center, Fred T. Korematsu Center for Law and Equality, Loyola University Chicago School of Law, the Hanks Center for Catholic Intellectual Heritage, Fordham University School of Law, the Institute on Religion Law and Lawyers Work at Fordham University School of Law, and the Center on Race, Law, and Justice at Fordham University School of Law. I'm also grateful as well, joining as co-sponsors for this event, the Institute for Humane Ecology at CUA. You can find out more about each of these institutes, and really if you want to find ways to become more engaged and involved in this issue, by following the link on our webpage. Finally, I'd invite you to support us in 3 different ways. First, you can join our mailing list, follow us on social media, and share word about these events with others. Word of mouth remains the most effective means of inviting others into dialogue with the Catholic intellectual tradition. At the end of this event, you can also support us by filling out the survey that will help us to gauge what we're doing right and what needs improving. And filling it out, you'll enter a raffle to win a gift card to our favorite independent bookstore, the Seminary Co-op. And finally, third, you can support us financially by donating today to help us to continue to put on events like these for free to viewers like you. And you can support us at www.lumenchristi.org/donate. Now, during today's event, there will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. You can, however, post a question at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of our screen. In addition to questions being read by the moderator, we'll also give voice to certain audience members to pose their questions. Today's program is being recorded and will stream from our YouTube page and will be also posted to our website, so it's easy for you to revisit the talk. A link will be included in the confirmation email and will be shared tomorrow. I now have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator, who will introduce our distinguished speakers. The Honorable Thomas Moore Donnelly serves as an associate judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County. Sworn as a judge in 2000, he currently serves in the Law Division Trial Section, and he has tried over 300 jury trials. He has taught at Loyola Law School for the past 30 years. He's a close friend and collaborator of the Institute, and most recently is spearheading these efforts to form a Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network. Tom, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the formative influence of Thomas Levergood, the founding director of Lumen Christi, not only in the Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network, but in the very topic we are discussing today. During the past decade, Thomas Levergood and I have had many conversations about the criminal justice system. In his lived experience, both growing up in the Detroit area and living in Hyde Park here in the Chicagoland area, made race a very crucial aspect for him in sorting out what kind of reform would improve our criminal justice system. This third virtual seminar is the third event for the Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network, a network that attempts to, in order to go about the process of, as they would say in Italian, aggiornamento, updating, do some ressourcement, go back to sources, find out what available parts of our tradition might aid us in addressing our contemporary problems. Now, these virtual events will lead up to several in-person events. First, in October of 2021, a scholars event in Seattle at Seattle University, and a scholars event at Madison in February of 2021, and the inaugural conference of the network in April of 2022. The network is made up not only of scholars, but of judges, lawyers, jail chaplains, those impacted by incarceration and our criminal justice system. And the effort that we will do or initiate in Georgetown will be part of building the relational infrastructure that will help us gain insights into solving some of what Michael described as the intractable problems that are facing our criminal justice system. Tonight, we're lucky to have three wonderful Catholic respondents to talk about these issues. And I'm going to read their bios and then proceed to introduce our lead presenter, Brandon Vaidyanathan. Herschella G. Conyers is a clinical professor of law and director of the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Clinic at the University of Chicago Law School. The clinic affords law students a supervised opportunity to provide direct client representation while working on juvenile justice issues, including policy initiatives, legislation, and systemic litigation. The clinic works with other institutional players to advance reforms in the criminal and juvenile justice area. In recent years, CJP has collaborated with the Illinois Judicial Council in presenting a symposium on understanding juveniles involved in the system, and most recently in a restorative justice conference that was held virtually just about a month ago. In addition to her clinic, Professor Conyers also co-teaches the intensive trial practice workshop, where I've been lucky enough to teach alongside her, and a seminar called Life and Death in the Law. Before joining the law school faculty, Professor Conyers served as an assistant public defender in the First Municipal Felony Trial and Multiple Defendants Division of the Cook County Public Defender's Office, where I met her as a young public defender at 13th in Michigan many, many years ago. During her time in the Multiple Defendant Division, she handled mostly capital cases. Before leaving the Public Defender's Office, Professor Conyers also served as supervisor in the First Municipal Division and deputy chief in the 6th District in Bridgeview. Professor Conyers is a graduate of both the University of Chicago's College and Law School. Darren W. Davis is professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame. His research interests cover most areas of public opinion and political behavior. He is the author of Negative Liberty, Public Opinion, and the Terrorist Attacks on America, which examines the role of perception on the trade-offs between civil liberties and security, political tolerance, and ideas of citizenship. And Perseverance in the Parish, Religious Attitudes from a Black Catholic Perspective, based on the first national survey of African American Catholics. The book explores the perceptions of racism and racial experiences in the Catholic Church. Brandon Vaidyanathan is Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Sociology at the Catholic University of America. He holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Notre Dame. His research examines the cultural dimensions of religious, commercial, medical, and scientific institutions and has been widely published in peer-reviewed journals. He is the author of Mercenaries and Missionaries, Capitalism and Catholicism in the Global South, Cornell University Press, 2019, and co-author of Secularity and Science, What Scientists Around the World Really Think About Religion, Oxford University Press, 2019. His ongoing research examines the mental health effects of COVID-19 pandemic on faith communities and among scientists. I'd ask that Professor Vaidyanathan and the remainder of the panelists unmute themselves, and I would invite Brandon Vaidyanathan to open with his presentation.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the kind invitation. It's honestly very humbling to be here, considering I'm not a scholar of race or a criminologist or an expert on criminal justice reform, which is also why I'm especially glad that we have Herschella and Darren here, who are the legitimate experts on these matters. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from them, and from those of you in the audience, especially, who might have insights for us to consider. The piece I've been invited to talk about is mainly meant to be a conversation starter. Tom asked me to say a word about how this essay came about. In my parish listserv about a year ago, we were having a vibrant discussion, first starting with Heather McDonald's article in the Wall Street Journal, and then more broadly about systemic racism. And so that's really where the impetus for this came about. I found McDonald's article really problematic, not simply for cherry picking data, which I guess is fine for an opinion writer, but also misrepresenting the claims that were made in the data she was citing. And more broadly, there seemed to be confusion around how racism, which is typically understood as individual prejudice, could be seen as systemic. And so, to me, the institutional factors that are alluded to in the concept of systemic racism, such as policies and norms and codes and regulations, et cetera, how they could consistently disadvantage certain groups and even communicate to them that they don't really matter, that was very real. It was fairly obvious to me, and it was very much my experience of growing up as an Indian citizen in the Middle East, where I became intimately familiar with both personal and institutional discrimination. So as I was trying to explain these issues, one of the members of our listserv asked if I could put something together for public discourse on some of the things I was arguing, and so this article came about. And so there are a couple of goals to this piece. One is conceptual, which is to try to bring a bit more clarity to what the concept of systemic racism is referring to. And the second is empirical, which is to address the data around police shootings, which was the focus of McDonald's article. For our purposes today, I'm not going to go into the police shooting data. I'm not sure we need to, but I guess we could in the Q&A if you wanted to. But I'm mainly going to focus on the first point. And so through the conversations I was having, it seemed to me that the term systemic racism, which is rhetorically powerful, may not be the best way to communicate the reality that it's pointing to. Partly because it provokes defensive reactions like "I'm not racist," "America's not racist," etc. Creates confusion as to how a system can exhibit prejudice, and more importantly, there was confusion around whether systemic racism was referring to the cause or effect. Is it the thing that's doing the explaining or the thing that's being explained? So for these reasons, I argued in my piece it might be better for us to talk about a racialized system, which is a complex of institutions that produces enduring disadvantages for certain racial groups. I mean, remember, in our context in the US, we're looking at a system where there was never historically any sort of level playing field between blacks and whites, right? There's been disadvantage from the beginning. And this disadvantaging is system-wide, as I show. So, compared to whites, blacks are more likely to be wrongfully convicted of a whole range of crimes, to be offered plea bargains that include jail time, to serve life without parole for nonviolent offenses, to receive longer sentences for the same crime, to be incarcerated while awaiting trial. I mean, incredibly long list of things. And so that's why I found it baffling how some people could argue that there is no systemic racism. So I then tried to identify at least 3 kinds of causal mechanisms that produce these disadvantages, these enduring disadvantages. And I think these mechanisms are being conflated when people talk about systemic racism. So what types of mechanisms might be at work? I just call them, for lack of ingenuity, type 1, type 2, and type 3. So type 1 is good old racism, individual prejudice and discrimination based on ideas of racial superiority and inferiority. And this, I think most people would agree, was the dominant mechanism from slavery through the Civil Rights Act. So that's some 350 years, right? And it operated both in individual level interactions as well as through laws. And now with the Civil Rights Act, the law disallowed individual discrimination based on race, but that didn't mean that racist beliefs and attitudes and negative stereotypes and so on could disappear overnight. Now, over time, I think we've seen that racist attitudes have declined, at least in what people are willing to report on surveys. But they haven't by any means completely vanished. And I suspect with social media, there might even be an increase and even intensification of this kind of racism in some pockets. So that is one mechanism. And often when people say racist, that's what they're thinking about. It's prejudice and discrimination and bias and so on. But there's a second type of mechanism which has to do with the institutional level. And this is, for this type 2, I'm looking within the criminal justice system. And here we're looking at laws and policies and norms that may not be inherently racist, but produce those racial disparities. And some of them could have been motivated by racist intent. So you could see this if you look at the history of, say, felon disenfranchisement laws or poll taxes. And they could also include other policies like the war on drugs or the war on crime, which led to mass incarceration, et cetera. So that's the second set of mechanisms. And then a third type is factors outside the criminal justice system. And so this includes all kinds of structural and cultural factors, such as redlining, policies that led to the breakdown of family life, disparities in healthcare, education and employment, cultural factors, unintended consequences of other social policies. The point is, there are a host of factors outside the criminal justice system that also play a role in shaping the background conditions for, say, police encounters. Now, you can come up with different categories and different kinds of mechanisms. This is one attempt. But the main point, what I've been trying to do is to see, can we develop a language that can, first of all, disentangle cause and effect, and secondly, help us to see systemic racism or systemic disadvantage, or whatever you want to call it, help us to see this as not just a 0-1 state. That is, either the whole system is racist or it's not racist at all, which is some of the debate that I've been seeing, but instead to see it as a matter of degrees. Why? Well, so that we can measure and track change. We could track improvement, track decline, track regression. So that was kind of my hope, because I think if we can't do that, how do we know if our policies and efforts are succeeding or not, right? So, I mean, to be clear, I'm not a positivist. I don't think that the only things that matter are those which we can measure. But in this case, to gain some traction and to move past name calling, I think trying to come up with some better concepts that could be operationalized and measured and tracked would really help. So that was the main point I was trying to argue conceptually in that piece. And I think I will stop there. Thank you.
And I was muted. So for our first response, Professor Herschella Conyers. Herschella?
Hi, thanks, Judge Donnelly. So I am here this evening in my role to talk about both my participation in, my willing participation in, and observation of the criminal and juvenile justice system. And I have been practicing as a criminal defense lawyer for over 30 years. And the notes that I have written, what I have written down, is of a piece, but I also want to bring this point home, that when we talk about race, we must include sex and gender in this conversation. It is also part of the conversation, the bigger conversation, and part of the other isms that have held us back, sexism and homophobia and all of those. They are also embedded in the criminal and juvenile justice system. So just to give you my sort of 8 points of observation and participation in the criminal justice system. One, it is a system of power. And it is a system of power that clearly identifies the insiders and the outsiders. The insiders, we get badges, we get easy access, we get things that let other people know we're important people coming through, and we'll see you in the courtroom or we will see you in the jail, but we have first access, and this is about us mostly. The major players in these systems continue to be predominantly white, male, and I don't think that this is just Cook County, but also politically connected. And I think that that's important to think about when we talk about what Brandon alluded to as the bigger institutions. And along with the major players being white, male, and politically connected, and my third observation, and it's separate from the second one, but it is important to understand, is toxic masculinity. And the toxic masculinity from the criminal and juvenile system flows primarily from the police, who are, as a rule, the most constant, most consistent witnesses, information gatherers in this system. And their culture, both of testifying and their culture of information gathering, has impacted this system in ways that I think are not healthy, and in ways that have suggested that women and, bleeding heart liberals and other such, unstrong human beings should not get involved where we don't really fit in. The other thing I want to talk about is cash bond, the cash bond system. Again, it goes to the notion of what other systems impact this. Well, a cash bond system does not work well for the poorest people in the community, who are also the people who are most likely to be arrested. And what the cash bond system leads to is, I'm so sorry, this is crazy. What the cash bond system leads to is that families will not pay their rent, not pay their bills to try to bond a loved one out. But the question then of, if the accused does not get out, where is the accused? And the question is if the accused is in a jail. And the higher the bond, obviously, the longer the accused will be locked up. And let me say this about Cook County Jail. Again, I've been going into that jail since approximately 1986. If it were an animal shelter, we would close it. It is hideous. It is filthy. It is rodent infested. You have human beings on top of each other. The nutritional value of the food there is practically non-existent. And that's my observation. My other observations are, even when we bring outsiders into the system to try to legitimize it, that is, when we bring jurors into a courtroom to decide matters of guilt or innocence, the issue of excluding minority jurors remains. And the case is Batson, which says that you could not kick somebody off of the jury because of race. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of cases brought about pretext, about why a person has been excluded. But it continues. And as long as, and the history of that still informs how we pick our jurors, the process of jury selection, the open nature of the jury selection. Just to give you 2 points, when most jurors are questioned, it is an open court. There are 2 things here I think we need to start to look at. This has been my observations. I think that to ask someone, one, if you have been a victim of a crime, you will be doing a great deal of harm unintended, and I believe it is intended, to women who have been sexually abused. They are not likely to raise their hand in a room of 45 strangers and say, yes, and I'd like to talk about it. So I think we need to look at how that system, jury selection, impacts. Similarly, when you ask someone if they have ever been convicted of a crime, likewise, this is not a badge of honor. And I think the person who may have been convicted of a crime and still obeys a jury summons should be given, again, the dignity of having that conversation in a private space. So there are ways to suppress juror participation, and it may be unintentional, it may not. That's an observation. So the other thing that I have seen, again, is the discounting, drastic discounting of mental health issues in poor and minority communities. It is frightening. It is, and it has probably been a major source of miscarriages of justice in sentencing and in trying to figure out what a person needs, both, and with the mental health issues, also I am including, substance abuse and addiction. And we're getting a little better. We now have specialty courts, but for years, they did not exist. And it was, and again, what it takes to get sent to a specialty court requires probably more than is absolutely necessary. And my other observation is the adultification and overcriminalization of children. At this point, and we've been working on this for years, but at this point, we're trying to just raise the age of detention to 13. Historically, we have had children in juvenile detention facilities for weeks, if not months, at the age of 9. And I think we are only able to do that when we adultify the conduct of children. And again, I am not an academic, and I don't do data well at all. But what I have looked at in the surveys and studies that I have read have suggested that we culturally tend to adultify Black and brown children. We see them as older than their actual age. We see them as a term that I hate, but street smart. Like that is an advantage in education and a developmental way that children can be brought to understand misconduct better because they are street smart. My definition of street smart is neglect. So, and with that adultification also, again, I think it's important to talk about girls in the system. Black and brown girls are seen as more dangerous and less likely to be believed when they say that they have been sex trafficked. And it remains, a problem. So those are my observations and questions about the criminal justice system. As I say, I have been an active participant in it, and I will leave you with two things if I have the time. As a clinician, my students go to court with me, and it is not uncommon for my students after we leave court to turn to me and ask me, where do the white kids go to court? It is a question I have been asked on more than one occasion. And then the final thing I'll leave you with, when I talk about how this is not, both the willing participants and the unwilling participants can be impacted. So about 3 years ago, I am in a courtroom preparing for trial. I have 2 students with me. I am in the well of the courtroom where the audience cannot cross through, and I am sitting there. with my students, and a new young sheriff, probably about 30-some-year-old white male, walks into the courtroom from the back. He walks over to me and he says, "Lady, you're not supposed to sit here." And I pull out my attorney card because I don't leave home without it. To hell with American Express. I don't leave home without my attorney card in this system. So I hand it to him. And what he says to me was not, "Oh, sorry, oh, counselor, whatever." He says to me, "I thought you looked too old to be a defendant." So those are my observations about the criminal justice and juvenile justice system that I have been in. And I will just simply say this: I firmly believe that there are well-intentioned, good-hearted, generous, smart people in this system. And so I look forward to hoping that this will bring us all in conversation with each other.
And that's a wonderful hope. Following Herschella Conyers will be Professor Darren Davis, and he'll give his response to Brandon's piece, and then we'll sort of mix it up a little bit. Darren?
Thank you, Thomas. That was so great. I feel like my comments are so minimal right now. Herschella, thank you very much. What I'd like to do is to talk about my perspectives based on some of my research and reading of the literature. And I want to press Brandon a little bit. In this article, in his provocative article, he mentioned a couple things that I like to question, like to press him on. And I'd like to start with this question: why don't things change? And it seems like Brandon is attributing this mostly to three various factors that include structural, also attitudinal. And I kind of want to focus on the attitudinal since that's what I specialize in. So why don't things change? Why is criminal justice reform necessary? Why is it going to be difficult? So the thing I would like to contribute is basically two things. One is that I think the problem, Brandon, is a lot larger. I think racial prejudice, racism will always exist. It's not going to go away. It's not going to go away anytime soon. But I'd kind of like to shift the conversation a bit. I'd like to shift the conversation a bit to suggest that people do not have to be racist in order to say and support policies against or challenging criminal justice reform because people don't have to be racist to do racist things. They don't have to be racist to say or do or support policies that racists support. There are other values, there's other motivations that actually contribute to the ills of society, to how people perceive the criminal justice system, to how people perceive people involved in the criminal justice system. So I want to talk about those other values. I want to talk about those other beliefs. In your article, you mentioned a book by Vanilla Silva, Racism Without Racists. And I think that really encapsulates the point I'm trying to make. That many traditional values in American society backfire. And they backfire in such a way in which they do more harm than good. Values like deservingness, beliefs in justice. Can you imagine that? That beliefs in justice, we all have different beliefs in justice, but those different beliefs in justice can actually backfire. What I'm actually talking about, Brandon, is that I've read research to suggest that Holocaust monuments actually increase anti-Semitism because people have a belief in a just world where only bad things happen to bad people. People are motivated to think that because only bad things happen to bad people, they are somehow deserving of their bad treatment or their harsh treatment, even in the harsh treatment that we see in the criminal justice system. So when Holocaust monuments are being constructed, the only way that people can make sense of why they exist is because the people who died in the Jewish Holocaust somehow deserved it. Bringing this closer to home, that individuals, mostly African Americans and Latinos, who are involved in a criminal justice system, there's a lack of empathy because people think that they deserved it. And people think that in order to maintain their sense of justice, that these people are deserving of the treatment that they receive. It's not about race. This is where I started. It's not about race per se. It is not racial prejudice. It is not racism, but it's based on these other values of belief in justice and belief in deservingness, system justification, just world beliefs, ideas of fairness. And I want to raise that here because race is extremely important and we can't forget that. But Brandon, I submit to you that I think the reason why things don't really change, especially in criminal justice reform, is because these other values. In addition to racial prejudice and structural racism, I'm not trying to discount those different mechanisms that you cite in your article. I'm not trying to deny those at all, and I think you're right on point. But I guess what I'm asking is, to what extent is that really complete? And there's another concept that I would like to raise, and that is moral disengagement. This raises the question, how is it possible for individuals to go along in their daily lives, but also treating people in a very harsh and heinous way? And that is because they disengage their sense of morality. They think it no longer applies. So they don't feel that sense of empathy. They don't see things as this moral struggle. And in that process, people believe that, again, I keep coming back to this term, that people are deserving of the poor treatment that they receive. That, look, good things are supposed to happen to good people. We are motivated to believe that only bad things happen to bad people. So Brandon, I guess what I'm asking is, to what extent is your argument in your piece really complete? We know that racism exists. You have shown that in your article very well. But I want to broaden the argument a bit to talk about how normal, everyday citizens become complicit in the problems that we see in the criminal justice system. It's not just racists. I guess that's my point. It's not just racist. It's common, everyday citizens operating under different motivations and ideas. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
And Brandon, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to both Herschella and Darren's remarks, and then we'll break it open for a free discussion.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Herschella, that was really moving. I mean, it's really incredible, the things you shared. I mean, it is, it is really quite, I don't know, heart-wrenching, I guess, to hear, particularly about the kids who are, are still being dehumanized in our system. And I think part of the challenge still is, as Bob Putnam said, is we don't see kids who are poor and from minority communities as our kids. We don't see them as citizens of our country. They're on the other side of the tracks, and we forget about them by and large. And so, that really is a serious issue. Yeah, where do white kids go to court? My gosh, it's really incredible. Darren, I do agree, on both of your points. Really, I think I did not take into account, so the kinds of individual level mechanisms I was focusing on, really the mechanisms I was trying to trace were those that are conflated with the concept of systemic racism. So when people talk about systemic racism, what do they mean? And what are the host of things that are mixed into that concept? And so that's why I tried to separate those three types. There are all kinds of other things, I'm sure, that are at work. And I think certainly just world beliefs, system justification beliefs, and so on, would be at play in driving the same outcomes. I think of the work of one of my colleagues, Austin Choi Fitzpatrick, who studied bonded laborers in India and sort of former slaveholders. And so you have these slaveholders who justify the caste system for oppressing their laborers. But it's not just that they see them as inferior. They also see themselves as defending a certain moral order. They see themselves as defending an order in which they are at the top, in which they are responsible for, they have this paternalistic attitude towards the bonded laborers, and they expect respect and deference and so forth. And that is, a little bit different from a kind of the sort of racist type of belief, right? So I think you're right about the deservingness ideas, and people want to believe that the system they're in is largely trustworthy, and so that is I think an obstacle, you're right, to reform, as well as the belief that the disengagement. I think of somebody who came up to me after I wrote my article, and they said, George Floyd, he should have just kept his head down. I hate cops too, but he had it coming for him, right? So this was the kind of way in which I think people try to say, well, it was his fault ultimately, and I think that they say, and if I were in his shoes, I would have done something differently. Therefore, what he did was not something that I can empathize with. So I do think those things are at work as well. It's not, my account is not meant to be comprehensive. I was mainly trying to make some distinctions in sort of a muddled concept, and try to see if that, separating certain elements could give us some traction on these issues. But I would be curious, to hear your thoughts as a political psychologist, social psychologist, on how do we overcome these biases? How do we, what do we do when we know that these defense mechanisms essentially are driving racism, where when they're leading to really problematic social consequences? Are there I don't know, ways to nudge people, or all kinds of great work that's being done by behavioral economists and so on? I'm just wondering, how do we harness the other side of this and get people to overcome this.
Darren, you want to take a crack at that?
Okay, Brandon, that's a very, very good question. How do you overcome these biases? You know, I think the first step is becoming aware that it's not just racial prejudice, that there are other values, even other cherished traditional values that are involved in social, political and socialization, actually. So we have to first become aware that, of course, they're racist. They're always going to be racist, but I don't think that that's necessarily a problem. The problem is that normal, everyday people, certainly more sizable percentage, become complicit. They become complicit. They look the other way. They operate off of racialized information, stereotypes that all contribute to the same level of intolerance. You mentioned George Floyd. I'm glad you brought up George Floyd, because here's the problem. You know, when I talk to people about George Floyd, and I talk about the murdering of unarmed Black men by the police, the first question that is most disturbing to me is, what did he do? I often hear that refrain, what did George Floyd do? As if any person can do anything to deserve being murdered in the street by the police. So that is kind of a sign of what I've been talking about, that people have this motivation to believe that the system is just, the system works. And how else can you explain the murder of someone like George Floyd other than to blame the victim as if he was somehow deserving of being judged by the police and executed by the police? So, but Brandon, to answer your question, the first thing is to become aware that these other motivations exist.
Can I ask a question? I think that's right. I think that human beings, we're very complicated. But Darren, something you said, you know, you're talking about racists and then you're talking about normal everyday people. For me, normal everyday people are racist. I don't think there's a subcategory here. I think that you can, that is the complication of being a human being, that you can harbor and believe thoroughly racist things, okay? And you can be a normal everyday person. You can give at church, you can tithe, you can do any number of decent, human, compassionate things and be a racist. I also, so I can be clear on this, I don't think that it is about Black or white and all the colors in between, but I do think it's about race. I know some Black racists, and I know, 20 years ago, there was a whole conversation about why Black people can't be racist. Yes, we can. We can be very good at it.
Yes.
And but to try to put the racist into the category, and again, I'll talk about sexism and the sexual assault of women and children, okay? Now, the statistics say that 1 in 4 girls or women will be sexually assaulted, right? That's a huge number of people. And I think part of the conversation that has gone awry in the sexual assault and the feminist movement is that what we have done is we have labeled men who sexually assault as monsters, and labeling them as monsters removes the moral content of their conduct so that we don't have to talk to them or treat them like normal, everyday people, but they are our fathers, our brothers, our husbands, our sons. And the same thing is true for racist people, which is they are our mothers, our sisters, brothers, cousins, and, you know, some of us wake up in the morning, damn, it's me. So the question, I think, is, and this was the question that I had for Brandon, I'm not ready to let go of saying racist yet. I think we run a terrible risk of talking about that for the racist that will translate into, there she goes with that old timey stuff. We done with that.
Okay, Herschella, I'm going to respectfully disagree a bit. I do not believe that everybody's racist. I believe that everybody, and part of the human design, is that we're hardwired for racial prejudice. We need a new language. We need new categories. We can't put everybody in the racist bucket. We can't create a racist dichotomy. Well, some people are racist, some people are not racist. The only thing I'm saying is that we should not get rid of those categories, but we need to understand how everyday common individuals who they themselves don't consider themselves racist end up doing racist things. So I'm not trying to minimize racial prejudice. I'm trying to expand the bucket within which we consider people's attitudes to be aligned with racial prejudice. Not everybody believes in the inferiority or hate Black folk. I just don't believe that.
I don't either. That's
Well,
not what I was saying. I don't either. But what I heard you saying was that there's this category of racist, and those are the people that we won't play with. And it's like, no, we got to play with those people. That was more my point.
my point is that we've been studying racists for the past 80 years. We know how they behave. We know how they think. We know how they respond to criminal justice reform. That is nothing new. What we don't understand is how normal, everyday people who are not racist, but end up doing the same racist things, end up challenging criminal justice reform. So
No, that's
this
fair.
is how.
That's fair, right. That's fair.
Brandon, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I don't want to get rid of the category of racist either, but I guess I just want to figure out, I don't want to equivocate too much. I want it to mean one thing. And so I find in the discussion on systemic racism, it shifts a lot. Sometimes we're talking about individual attitudes about superiority, inferiority. Sometimes it means the system is producing racializing effects, right? So it's producing disadvantage, and that outcome is referred to as racism. So it's a kind of moving about that I guess makes it hard to know what we're talking, especially when people are arguing. It helps to have some precision on when we say racist, we mean this, and so can you have racist people, or are there only ideas that are racist? As something like Kendi would say, there you have racist ideas and people are not racist, and so on. But I just want to sort of bring some more precision, and for the sake of at least my argument, I was saying let's restrict it to this type 1 individual, traditional old school definition, and then for the kind of thing that we're calling systemic racism, which is the institutional factors that are generating disadvantage, as if they're not inherently reflecting an attitude of superiority versus inferiority, then let's call it something else. So that's all I was trying to say.
Well, Brandon, that's a good point, because I have a new book coming out in the fall called Racial Resentment. So I propose that we call it racial resentment. But I think the general point is that we need new language. We need new language to help to understand that not every utterance of something negative about race is racist. Is racial. It may not be racist, but we need a new dialogue, because Brandon, like you suggested, these issues are very complex, and just trying to always analyze these things from a racial prejudice perspective is incomplete. It doesn't really tell the full story.
I want to open up to the questions that have come in. We have over 460 people on our webinar this evening, and lots of questions. So I'm going to start off with Professor Steve Garvey from Cornell, who says, I have not heard any concrete proposals tonight for reform. I've tried to scan the public discourse article for reform. All I saw was maybe better police training. Is there anything else more concrete that our panelists tonight would suggest for reform? And I'll give you first crack, Brandon, since he.
I think this should be in Herschella's court. I'm a sociologist, so
Well played.
Right. We're the guys who make the laws, right? You made the laws, you made the mess, you clean it up. Nothing like an ally. Okay. Yeah, well, I think this whole thing about police training is just not going to get us too far. And again, in terms of George Floyd, as I understand it, the officer that killed him was the training officer that day. So I'm not big on just training, but what we've got to do, I think, is seriously look at what Brandon talks about as those structural and cultural factors outside of the system that impinge on it, because that's where they get their juice from, actually. And I say to my students all the time, we get the police departments we want. We get the judges we want. We get the lawyers we want. And how do we know that? Police officers do not live in separate embankments. They come home to their wives, their husbands, their children, their fathers and mothers, and they are embraced with open arms. We love our police officers. We love our judges. We love our lawyers. So it is bigger than the criminal and juvenile justice system in my world. And so I think it has to start really in education. I'm talking about pre-K, that we need to look at in kindergarten, in nursery school. What are the lessons we are teaching children? There are children who are being taught to be racist and or racialized as they are being taught to speak. So I think, and there's plenty of work. I mean, where do we start? Start wherever you are. There's plenty of work to go around in this one, I think. I think the conversation has to be kept going on all sides, and to hear things that we never thought we would hear. But if we are going to impact our systems, then it has to start culturally. And I think with the family norms and family values, again, the police come home to us and we embrace them. And that's the way.
I'm going to move on to another question. I encourage anyone who's listening to add their questions in the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to them. Father David Jones from St. Benedict the African Parish here in Chicago asks, a conversation that hopes to eradicate systemic racism has to be about the Derek Chauvins, not the George Floyds. is the problem that America is most comfortable with fixing the victims and not the perpetrators? And I see Herschella nodding vigorously to that question.
I think that's the point you just made.
So he asked
With the-
further, can you grow up in America and not be formed and influenced by a system of education, formal, informal, rooted in a system designed to empower some by dehumanizing the other? And I think that, again, is what Herschella has brought up. Darren, what's your thoughts about that? I mean, that the education is the...
First, I'd like to say hello to Father Jones. I haven't seen him in a bit because of this pandemic. I hope everything is well. Look, I'm a professor. I'm on the front lines of the education battle. I know that education to a certain extent is very, very important. But for the vast majority of American citizens, they are uneducated. They're uneducated about racial politics. They're uneducated about these complex issues and emotions, and they buy into different types of motivated reasoning and confirmation bias, and they are being fed information, even non-factual information that they think is true. So you can't educate your way out of that. There has to be some other mechanism, some other type of intervention. Otherwise, we're placing too much of a burden on education. And when we start talking about education, I think it's too late. I think the die is already cast. So there needs to be some form of intervention very early on. Like I said, I think all of the ideas that we've been talking about are hardwired. I think people in particular contexts will support things that they wouldn't normally support. Even educated folk have been shown to exhibit many of these motivations as well. So, Father Jones, I'm not confident in education. I don't know what else to tell you.
We have a question from Connie Racketon. Where do our panelists see the Catholic Church in the midst of all this? I see smiles, but I don't hear any answers.
Well, all right, here I go again. That's what I mean as part of the education. I think our faith education and what we believe in and what we are taught with as core values goes a long way, even before we start pre-K and kindergarten. We are taught that's not right, that's not nice, that's wrong, don't do this, don't do that. And I think the Catholic Church has a critical role in this. It is a body of influence that is stunning. So I think as the church calls out the criminal and juvenile justice systems, its members will listen. And I think there's going to be some splits and some, schisms going on, but the church remains, all churches remain, not just the Catholic Church, but certainly the Catholic Church is a dominant religion in the world, has influence and sway, and therefore a responsibility to talk about these things and to acknowledge them and to take right and just positions. And I'm certainly not a scientist, and I don't know what people are hardwired to do, but it's troubling to me. I think we can make ourselves better. And I think that's one of the functions of religion, is to try to help us make ourselves better.
If I may answer that question, I think that's a very important question. And I'm gonna equivocate here. I'm gonna disagree because several reasons. One, I think the Catholic Church has many intractable problems of its own that is seeking to resolve. First. Second is I've been critical of the Catholic Church when it comes to racial prejudice, racial discrimination, when it comes to the training of priests to deal with these issues. So I ask you, where does the Catholic Church amass the expertise in these issues in order to be effective? The Catholic Church places so within the Catholic Church, where the rubber meets the road is at the priest level. And I just don't see individual priests having the expertise or being trained appropriately enough to become engaged in these issues. I think if change is to occur, it happens at the parish level within the parish community, within the Catholic parish community. I think the Catholic Church needs to understand that that is somewhat limited in the expertise, in its own expertise in dealing with these issues. And the church needs to reach out, especially at the parish level, to gain the type of energy and expertise needed to challenge racial prejudice, criminal justice reform. So the Catholic Church has a role to play, but I think that role is most evident at the parish level.
It's a challenging question.
I agree with that.
My sense is that a lot of parishes are politically either homogenized or split, and I find, my sense of the Catholic Church in America is also largely like split along political lines, and I think that informs this issue much more than the gospel does, by and large, and that's, I think, a challenge with social media and the bubbles that people are caught up in. It's I think we would have been much better off if we had a world without social media, where our parishes could be spaces where we could actually have genuine conversation. But I think people just get polarized too easily, and it's very hard to have difficult conversations. It's hard, and again, parishes are also territorial, so it's hard to actually go out and encounter people who are very different. And we don't know enough about, in general, I think, the history of Black Catholicism is not very well known, for most sort of white or sort of other immigrant Catholic parishes. So there's so much we have to learn about our history too. So and Darren, I think you're right. There are other serious issues that we're dealing still with, the clergy sex abuse crisis, and bankruptcies and all sorts of other issues that parishes are dealing with and priests are dealing with.
Well, Brandon, those are big issues, but the most serious issue is this secularization trend in American society. People are not in church. The Catholic Church are losing parishioners left and right. So the church has these big issues that it needs to resolve first. People are not in the church. Churches are closing. Look at the number of church closings in Chicago. Every year, hundreds of churches hundreds of Catholic churches are closing across the country. So there is a serious issue that needs to be resolved within the Catholic hierarchy. And then perhaps maybe after we resolve those issues, maybe we can start tackling some of these cultural issues.
Well,
but Brandon, that's a good point.
Judge Ramon Ocasio asked two hard questions. Do Black Americans commit more violent and gun crimes? And does poverty engender crime?
So the question that Judge Ocasio is asking, do they commit more crimes than who?
Well, he didn't say, but I.
Okay. Okay. You know, again, it's you'd have to look at the statistics, and there's a way that you could say yes, and there's a way that can say, what does that mean? Okay. Again, if you, and I'll start with, you know, most of the offenses that my kids start out with, most of my kids start out with thefts. Most of those thefts are in grocery stores. You know, 9-year-olds who have dinner on the table usually don't need to go steal. And then, you know, it escalates. And I'm glad to hear Brandon say this social media thing is going to be the destruction of us all. So I would say, yes, that they commit more crimes. I don't think, though, the research has suggested they don't commit more drug crimes than white people. We seem that seems to be a level playing field, if you will. So, and I'm sorry, what was the second part of it? You know, what are
just poverty and gender crime?
Yes, it certainly does.
Friar Paul Schlumer says, and it's sort of countering Darren and Herschella, he says, could it be that everyone is racist, but that some of us racists recognize the impulse and actively work against it? Some recognize the impulse and don't have the guts, integrity to act against it for whatever reason. The ethical term is passive cooperation with evil, and some people foster it.
Darren?
I would agree with that, but you still can't consider everybody as racist because some people have information, some people have motivations to counteract those beliefs. So for instance, let me give you an example. In public opinion research, we can show that many people are aware of racial stereotypes. We can show this routinely in public opinion data, but that doesn't mean that everyone will operate off those stereotypes. Because one is just aware doesn't make one racist. So this goes back to my point. We need better language. We need better categories. We need a better way of distinguishing these individuals who have these complex beliefs. Just because I'm aware of racial stereotypes among various groups doesn't make me a racist. So people have other existing information to counteract, or as we say in the social psychology literature, to inhibit or deactivate these automatically activated racial constructs. So I don't believe that everyone is racist, no.
We are out of time, but I want to offer our panelists one last opportunity to sum up and start with Herschella.
I just want to thank people for the opportunity to speak. I have enjoyed meeting Brandon and Darren and hearing what they have to say. I still believe that most of us are racist. I think we become racist because we are in a racist society and that we're racist before we know it. Although I do agree that there are things that can stop it and help us short circuit it. I don't think we have to act on that racist impulse. So, you know, I think that that's sort of it for me. I have definitely enjoyed this. I hope that these conversations can continue, and that, we can talk to each other with respect and with some fairly daring ideas. I think that that's one thing I'm hoping that this will do, is help us model for each other how to engage with each other when we disagree.
Darren?
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Herschella, you're the greatest. I just kind of like to leave the group with what I thought was the most provocative question of the night, and that is, what is the role of the Catholic Church? What is the role of the Catholic Church in combating racism? What is the role of the Catholic Church in criminal justice reform? So this is my plea. We need to help the church. The church needs our help. The church, the Catholic Church, can't do it alone. The Catholic Church has some significant problems that it needs to resolve. We need to be there to help resolve these issues in the church. And we need to help the Catholic Church figure out many of these complex issues. So the church needs us.
And Brandon, last word.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that too. I mean, I think that's really. I'm curious to learn more about the work of the Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network and to help in any way. But I think that's really crucial. What is the contribution of the gospel to this conversation, right? And I think we can talk about data and measurement, which is the sort of the thing I do, and try to conceptualize racism in different ways. But ultimately, we need to try to figure out how to overcome the impasse we're in our society, where I think largely now we're just fighting, we're polarized and fighting. And so I think that the church and the gospel really are crucial in terms of moving forward, and we need to figure out concretely what that contribution looks like.
And that is what our Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network endeavors to do, is to continue that conversation and bring forward the best ideas to help resolve, as what we talked about as the intractable problems, especially concerning the dehumanizing effect of racism in our current criminal justice system, which I have to share Herschella's just empirical observations of a very racialized system, to use Brandon's word. And that is something for any of us who have been working in this system, as she and I have been for 30 years, very problematic, is something that is deeply troubling to Catholics, because it is in revulsion when you compare it to the ideals of the Book of Revelation or of Paul's epistles, which espouse this anti-racist rhetoric, but we have fallen as a society so far short of it in the racialized policies and realities of the current criminal justice system. So I want to thank all of our panelists and invite all of our audience members to join me in thanking them. I want to especially thank tonight William Jordan, who has been my helper along the way since September to form the Catholic Criminal Justice Network, and is largely responsible for this event. I also want to thank you for joining the Lumen Christi, you audience participants, for tonight's event. We hope you enjoyed it. You can revisit a recording of this event on Lumen Christi's website or YouTube page. You can also get the link to tonight's event in your email tomorrow, or you will get that. So if you enjoyed it, you can share it with others. The Institute's next event, the Song of Songs in Monastic Interpretation, will take place this Sunday night at 7:30 on Zoom. Stay tuned for further program from the Institute's Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network, and also from Lumen Christi's other series, including a series this summer on monastic wisdom and a series on Catholic Islamic dialogue and history. Here at Lumen Christi, we are seeking to present the Catholic intellectual tradition in all of its breadth and depth, and make it a living dialogue partner for you. Again, echoing Michael's thanks at the beginning, tonight's event would not have been possible without the support of our co-sponsors of the Catholic Criminal Justice Reform Network, including the Institute for Human Ecology, Georgetown University Law Center, Notre Dame Law School, Boston College Law School, University of St. Thomas School of Law, the Catholic Lawyers Guild of Chicago, Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, Colby House Jail Ministry, Seattle University Crime and Justice Center, the Fred Korematsu Center for Law and Equality, Loyola University School of Law, the Hanks Center for the Catholic Intellectual Heritage, Fordham University School of Law, the Institute for Religion, Law, and Lawyers' Work, and the Center on Law, Race, and Justice. Finally, I invite you to get the word out to your parish, to follow us on social media and share our other materials with your friends. You can also go to lumenchristi.org. And again, I want to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists and wish you all a blessed evening. Thank you.